Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Not in the obvious way. No footsteps behind you, no faces turning your way. But something deeper. An awareness you can't shake, like unseen eyes just beyond your field of vision. I used to think it was paranoia, until I knew for sure. It started gradually, like a whisper in the wind. Mornings felt heavier, the air damp with the scent of wet pavement and decaying leaves. The sky, washed in deep reds and greys, carried an eerie stillness. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Maybe I should have paid more attention to the silence before everything escalated. The first time I noticed it was at the convenience store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I grabbed a drink, the cold can slick in my hands. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something, a flicker of movement in the glass door's reflection. My name echoed softly in the empty aisle, distorted, almost stretched. When I turned, there was nothing, or so I thought. She was there, standing perfectly still just past the entrance, staring straight ahead. Her face was blank, almost mannequin-like, her eyes unblinking. At first, I convinced myself she was just another customer. But when I left, she was still there, her head tilting ever so slightly as I walked past. From then on, every time I stepped outside, I felt it. That weight, that pressure, like something clinging to my shadow. It wasn't always her, not visibly, but the presence remained. A cold, creeping sensation, as if the air itself had eyes. One night, while walking home, I caught a glimpse of movement in a storefront window. A reflection mirroring my every step. But there was someone else in it too, just out of frame. I spun around, but the street was empty. My pulse pounded in my ears, matching the faint, rhythmic sound of footsteps, ones that weren't mine. At home, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion. But every night, as I sat on the couch with the TV flickering, I'd catch sight of her through the wide window. She wasn't watching the screen. She was watching me. The first night, I brushed it off. The second night, she was back. By the third, I stopped looking. I forced myself to focus on anything else, but the weight of her gaze pressed against me. For an entire week, she stood there, unmoving, as if waiting. So I stopped going downstairs at night. I stayed in my room, door locked, lights off. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. One night, I woke up to a faint creak. My bedroom door was open, just slightly. Through the narrow gap, I saw her. Wide, unblinking eyes peering at me from the darkness. I froze. My breath hitched. And then, as if realizing she'd been caught, she turned and ran. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hall, quick and light, as if she barely touched the ground. The worst was yet to come. It happened in the bathroom. Steam curled around me as I turned on the shower. That's when I heard it, a slow, deliberate push against the door. Not a knock, a force pressing inward. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. I turned. The handle shifted. With a burst of panic, I yanked the door open. And there she was, just standing there, eyes locked onto mine. Something in me snapped. I don't remember what I said, but my voice shook with anger, fear, desperation. The moment the words left my mouth, she bolted, disappearing down the stairs like a blur. And after that, she was gone. No more glimpses in windows, no more soft footsteps trailing behind me, just silence. But even now, when I walk alone at night, I feel it again. That weight, that pressure. As if somewhere, just beyond my sight, she's still watching, waiting. Before it all began, I couldn't tell if my memories were real or just fragments from a mind unraveling. Every night I'd wake from a half-remembered flash, a smile in the glow of a street lamp, then darkness. Was that a true recollection or merely a nightmare? I often wondered if my mind had long held secrets I was not meant to know. Years ago, my ex-fiancé of 7 years vanished without warning. One day he simply didn't return. No explanation, no goodbye. I was left with a shattered heart and a persistent uncertainty. Was I truly losing everything, even myself? I often questioned whether those recollections were genuine or if my fear had sown doubt from the start. At lunch, my coworker Amy leaned in and said, "Try something new. Do something different." I wasn't one for casual encounters. My ex and I had grown up together, but in that moment a quiet urge stirred. I whispered, "This isn't just fear. It's a call from my past." That evening I downloaded a dating app and matched with a man whose profile carried a subtle, dangerous charm. Tall, well-built, and wearing a black leather jacket. His image evoked a tangible memory of loss, a hint of familiar cologne and the chill of a rain long past. I wasn't sure if I was reaching for what I'd lost or holding on to an echo. Our first meeting was in a busy park. Amid low voices and the distant hum of traffic, a pause fell between our words. Pause. Then a breath. Every step, every rustle of wind was noted, as if each sound marked a measured moment. On our second date, a brief coffee near that same park, the cool porcelain of my cup, the soft clink of cutlery, and a trace of his cologne merged with a fleeting glimpse of light on a sunny afternoon. I couldn't tell if that moment was real or a trick of my mind. By our third date, a modest dinner in a dim restaurant, the tension grew. He sipped his drink, claiming it enhanced every flavor. When the waiter arrived late, I heard him murmur under his breath, a signal from a past I'd tried to let go. Then suddenly he removed his black leather jacket. He draped it over an empty chair, but it slipped and fell at my feet. I bent down. The cold, worn fabric brushed my skin. As I picked it up, I noticed on the label hidden inside, directly behind the nape, a faded word, always. In that instant, memories both gentle and unsettling flooded in. I recalled that half-remembered smile in the street lamp's glow, then darkness. I asked quietly, "Am I losing my grip on reality, or is this a sign I must not ignore?" I wondered if these signs were simply reflections of my inner turmoil. Was I meant to decipher these clues, or were they only fragments of my fear? Before I could process it further, he reached out as if to reclaim the jacket. My voice faltered. "I need to leave." Pause. A moment's stillness. Then, nothing. The ambient noise shrank to a solitary creak. I left in haste and reached my car. Once inside, I locked the doors and gripped the steering wheel until I felt my pulse through its surface. Every sound, the engine's murmur, a distant door closing, even my uneven breath, seemed louder. In the rearview mirror, a shadow lingered. My heart pounded as old doubts merged with new fear. I reversed and drove into the night, streetlights cutting through the darkness while a red taillight remained in view. After a series of sharp turns over nearly 15 minutes, I realized I was being tailed. With trembling hands, I called out if it was truly him. His calm reply stated he was concerned for my safety. Confused and frightened, I demanded he stop. In that desperate moment, I couldn't understand why I hadn't called for help sooner. I redialed and, in a trembling whisper, recounted every detail. My date was following me, and the jacket he wore was the one I'd given my ex for our anniversary, my ex who had vanished 7 weeks ago. The operator's measured tone did little to ease my growing anxiety. Soon, flashing lights appeared behind me. In an instant, my pursuer swerved and sped past. In a shop window's reflection, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, a silent indication that things were not as they appeared. He slowly lowered his gaze, as if dismissing a truth that required no further words. Immediately, I pulled over to wait for the responding officers. I gave my statement and pleaded with them to chase after him, but after an hour, no trace could be found. The following day, I went to the police station for a follow-up. They informed me that the CCTV footage from the park, the coffee shop, and the restaurant revealed no clear image of him. Considering his meticulous nature, they had begun processing a restraining order. After that night, another sign emerged. Then the next clue appeared. That next day, while still unsettled, I found a single rose on my doorstep. Later in the office break room, I discovered another rose accompanied by a handwritten note that simply read, "Always." The lone rose and its sparse note unsettled me more than I could explain. In the break room, the sight of the rose and the brief script made me pause. I reported the incident to management. Their review of the CCTV confirmed the janitor's role, deepening the mystery. Yet even his clear-cut explanation left me with lingering questions. The old janitor admitted he'd been paid to leave the rose and note. He recalled that morning an encounter with an older gentleman, his features partly obscured by a white beard and thick eyeglasses, who had requested the delivery. Though the man's appearance was unremarkable, the janitor remembered his manner. The police later obtained a sketch, and further inquiry revealed this was the same man often seen in the park at sunset, feeding pigeons. When questioned, he explained that a younger man had offered him a substantial sum to deliver the rose and note as an apology intended for me, a gesture tied to a personal love story he described as sincere. That marked the beginning of a recurring nightmare. Every so often, I would find a rose on my doorstep, by my window, anywhere along my lane. Despite securing a restraining order and all available evidence, his stalking persisted. After exhausting every avenue with the police, I made a drastic decision. I packed my essentials and left abruptly. Only a significant disruption of my routine allowed me to escape. I booked a flight that very day, choosing air travel as the most controlled means of escape. I even alerted airport security to keep a closer watch. I won't disclose where I went or what I'm doing now, for I still fear he might be watching. I now carry the knowledge that some mysteries never fully resolve. Though I escaped that night, the echo of these events remains with me. This happened back in high school. Linda, my best friend, invited me to her little brother Leo's birthday party. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon, balloons, cake, and kids running around. Then a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Bob. He had been in our class for years, always the quiet, awkward one. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then it was barely a mumble. People avoided him, not out of cruelty, but because he felt off. I turned to Linda. "Did you invite Bob?" She made a face. "Heck no. He's the entertainment." The word stuck in my head. Entertainment? Minutes later, Bob returned. My stomach dropped. He was in a clown costume. Thick, uneven face paint smeared across his skin, exaggerating his already unsettling features. The forced grin, the hollow eyes, the garish colors, it made my skin crawl. And yet, he was different. The usual hunched posture, the withdrawn muttering, gone. He was lively, animated, throwing himself into his act with a manic enthusiasm that felt wrong. He twisted balloons into animals, pulled ribbons from his sleeves, made exaggerated gestures that sent kids into fits of laughter. But I wasn't laughing. I had never told Linda this, but I had a deep, irrational fear of clowns. And Bob? Bob felt like something worse than a clown. The smell of grease paint mixed with the overly sweet scent of birthday cake. The laughter of children warped into something distant and unnatural. The room felt too small. The walls felt like they were closing in. I barely made it through the hour. When the party ended, I practically ran home, but that was only the beginning. The first letter appeared in my locker the next day. "You're beautiful. I like you." The handwriting was jagged, pressed into the paper with too much force. I stared at it for a long moment before crumpling it up and tossing it into the garbage. The next morning, another letter. "Why did you throw it away?" That hurt me. A single red balloon was tied to the vent inside my locker. My hands shook as I untied it. It escalated after that. A balloon dog, identical to the one he made at the party, slipped into my bag. A plastic flower pin, just like the one he wore, left on my desk. A torn piece of fabric, smeared with red, stuffed into my locker. Then came the tapping. At first I thought I was imagining it, but as the nights passed it grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Always the same rhythm. Always just past midnight. One night I finally looked. Bob stood under the street lamp, dressed in the same clown costume, holding a red balloon. His face, still painted in that grotesque grin, tilted slightly upward. He didn't move. He just watched. I barely slept that night. The next day my mom went straight to the principal. That's when we learned the truth. Bob's life was a mess. He lived in a run-down trailer park, surviving on food stamps, caught in a cycle of neglect and instability. He had no real friends, no stable home. Just school, his odd obsessions, and now, apparently, me. The counselor mentioned something else, something they weren't supposed to say. A long, heavy silence stretched before she finally muttered, "There was an incident. A few years ago, another girl." She didn't elaborate. When the principal threatened expulsion, the harassment stopped. No more notes, no more tapping, no more red balloons. For weeks I tried to convince myself it was over, that I was safe. Then late one night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. Faint, just barely audible. A whisper, it almost sounded like laughter. I told myself it was just the wind. Years passed. I moved away, got a job in the city, and then, one evening, as I left my office, I saw it. A single red balloon tied to the metal fence outside. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears. I forced myself to breathe. It's just a coincidence, I told myself. Just some kid's balloon. But that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. A message from Linda. "Hey, I don't want to freak you out, but I think I just saw Bob."